Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. All praises are due to Allah, and may Allah's peace and blessing be upon His Prophet Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to session number 4 in the book My Worship. In this class, inshallah ta'ala, after we have done the how to perform the complete wudu ablution, today inshallah ta'ala we'll go over a related topic, which is the conditions of performing wudu ablution. So there are some conditions required in order for our ablution to be acceptable and for our salah to be also sound and acceptable. The first condition is Islam. A person must be a Muslim in order for his ablution to be accepted. So if a person was not a Muslim and he wanted to imitate the Muslims, he wanted to see and test the salah itself, how much level of humbleness and being closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the wudu or the salah itself. If he's not a Muslim, despite the feelings that he gets, his ablution, his salah is not acceptable, he's not rewarded for it. So it is a precondition for every act of worship that a person must be a Muslim. So this is required from the person who is going to perform ablution, that he must be a Muslim in order for his ablution to be acceptable. Secondly is sanity. If a person is insane, Allah had exempted him from all acts of worship because he is not able to use his conscience and to realize what exactly he's doing. So that's why Allah has forgiven such a person from all acts of worship, and he is not being held accountable of any of his mischief whatsoever. So sanity is the second condition. Thirdly, the person must reach the age of discernment, and many scholars decided the age of 7 years old is the limit where the child is ordered and commanded to perform salah. While prior to that, it is recommended that the one teaches his child from a younger age to perform wudu and to perform prayer, of course. But when does it become a command upon the parents to command their child to perform wudu or salah is once he reaches the age of discernment. So if he reaches that age, then his salah is acceptable. Prior to that, he may perform the salah and wudu as a mean to get disciplined to the act of worship itself. And Allah is the all rewarding subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the fourth condition is intention. Like we have mentioned earlier, any act of worship requires that we hold prior to it an intention that we are performing it in addition for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, performing it as wudu or as a salah or as a tawaf, for instance, remembrance around the Kaaba itself. So you must attend the intention in your heart for the act of worship that you're going to perform. In the case of ablution, you attend before starting the ablution that I'm going to perform ablution. Of course, you don't have to utter any statement, but attend in your heart that I'm about to perform this act of worship, in our case, the ablution, the wudu. And of course, to utter the intention with the mouth, it's against the way of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In fact, many scholars classify this as an innovation in the religion, which is a sin, which changes the nature of the worship itself. So we are restricted to the way of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and to avoid introducing any new invented acts of worship to the deen. The fifth condition is purity of water. Like we have mentioned earlier, we have the two types of water, the tahur, which is the pure water, and the second is the impure, the najis. And of course, we cannot use a water which is impure to make ablution with. If that water was impure, and we perform salah, or we do ablution and then we perform salah with it, the ablution is invalid. Therefore, the salah also is invalid. The sixth condition is removal of the impediments. This is in the case of like women, if they have nail polish in their fingers, they must remove it before performing the wudu. Or if a person had some paint traces in his wudu parts, in his arm, in his face, in his foot, here he needs to remove any trace of paint or polish from his body before performing the wudu. The reason for that is because the paint and the nail polish stands as a barrier between the skin and the water reaching it. So if there is a trace of nail polish in the finger, or the entire nail is covered with nail polish, we use water, the water does not reach the skin or the nail. This is why we must remove the nail polish prior making ablution. And in the case of women, this is something that they need to pay great attention to, because it is almost a daily practice with women. The seventh condition is abstaining from the invalidators. So like we've covered, or we'll talk about the invalidators later. Anything that causes the wudu to be invalidated, this must be removed. So we should avoid anything that will invalidate the wudu while we are making the ablution. So someone cannot make ablution while excreting air. One cannot make ablution while urinating at the same time, because this acts invalidates the ablution itself. So if someone does such a thing, he needs to start all over again for his ablution. So these are the conditions which we need to pay attention prior starting the ablution. So we must maintain those conditions and look after these conditions, that they are not broken and that they are maintained before we start performing ablution. The second issue we need to pay attention to is the pillars of wudu, the pillars of ablution. We have spoken about the conditions. Conditions are prior to the act itself, the wudu itself, the ablution itself, while the pillars are part of the ablution itself. Those pillars are mentioned in the chapter 5, verse number 6 of Surah Al-Ma'idah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that we must wash the face, the two arms, the head, and the feet. So those are the four parts of the body we are required to wash for ablution. Two more pillars are added, is the order. Those pillars must be performed in order. So if someone starts, for instance, washing the feet, we say your ablution is invalid. You must follow the order mentioned in the ayah, verse of Surah Al-Ma'idah, the chapter of Al-Ma'idah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the face first, then the arm, then the head, and finally the feet. So you must follow this sequence for your ablution to be valid. So those are the four parts of the body. Again, the first pillar is washing the face, including the mouth and the nostrils. Secondly, washing the entire arm from the fingertip and up and including the elbow, right and left. This is the second pillar. The third pillar is wiping the head with including the ears. So this is the third pillar of wudu. The fourth pillar is washing the feet. The right foot first, then the left foot next, from the toes up and including the ankle. So those are the limbs which we are required to wash in the wudu ablution. Like I said earlier, the tertib, the order in which those wudu parts are washed must be maintained. So we must follow this order. If we do not maintain the order, this wudu, this ablution is invalid. We cannot pray the salah, like said by the majority of scholars. And the last pillar of the wudu is called al-muwala. Al-muwala means not to leave a big time gap between washing a part and the next part. And how do we really know the exact time between, as a gap between the two parts, is if the previous part becomes dry, then we cannot move to the next part and wash it. We need to start all over again. But if there was a slight gap, like 1 minute or two, and the previous limb was still wet, we can continue our ablution. For instance, I washed my face, okay? Then I received a call and I went and answered the call. And that call took 5 minutes, for instance. So after I finished my call, I find out that my face became dry. It's not wet anymore. Here in this case, we must start ablution all over again. But if, for instance, I washed my arm, okay, and I received again, or somebody knocked my house door, and I opened the door and I spoke to him, and like 1 minute later, I completed talking to him. Then I wanted to complete my wudu. I still find my arm wet. Here I can continue my ablution, no problem. I don't have to start all over again. So this is the sixth condition, and this is how to know the limitation or the criteria in which whether I start wudu all over again or continue my ablution. And this is by looking to how long is the gap, and is the previous limb became dry from water. If it is dry, I have to start all over again. If it's not, still wet, I can continue my ablution. So these are the pillars. Of course, pillars mean we must do in the sequence that we have mentioned here. But there are issues like we have mentioned yesterday, where we start first by washing the two hands, right? This act is actually from the sunnah, meaning it is recommended, done by him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But if somebody neglects washing the two hands up to the wrist and starts immediately with his mouth, nostrils, and face, and continues his wudu is valid. Why is that? Because he's still maintaining the pillars. The pillars start with washing the face with the mouth and nostrils, and the next, the entire arm. So the first act, like we have taken yesterday, to wash the two hands up until the wrist, this is sunnah, this is recommended act. So because he used to do it, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But why did the ulama mention that it is sunnah, it is not a pillar, meaning that we must do? They say based on what was mentioned in the Quran, those are the acts which are obligatory. Other than that, it is recommended, meaning that if you miss the recommended parts, acts, your wudu is still valid and acceptable. So we have taken the conditions, those are prior to the wudu. We have taken the pillars which are part of the wudu. Now let us move to the invalidators of wudu, things which may lead to making our ablution invalid. And we need to make ablution if we wish to perform salah, of course. So the first one is any discharge from the private parts, excrement, urine, semen, gas, etc. So any excretion from the private parts invalidates the ablution. Like we mentioned earlier, the case of the major state of impurity, minor state of impurity. So we look to the case of this excrement. Does it cause a person to be in a major state of impurity, or is it something that makes the person in a state of minor impurity, like urinating, defecating? This makes the person in a state of minor impurity. Therefore, he needs to make wudu if he wishes to pray. So this is the first invalidator. The second invalidator is losing consciousness. If somebody faints, he loses conscious. Why is that? He loses his ablution. Why is that? Because he does not realize what exactly happens with his body when he is in such state. Also, if somebody sleeps deeply, a deep sleep, but not a nap where he can realize what goes around him. And how to distinguish between a deep sleep and a quick nap is that if somebody is awakened, he wakes up and he can realize where he is. It does not take few seconds to know where he is. If it takes from him few seconds to realize where am I, then in this case, this is deemed as a deep sleep. So he needs to make wudu if he insists on, if he wants to perform salah in this case. Scholars mention that if somebody was sitting, okay, like me on a chair, or like in the masjid, where his bottom is on the ground, they say if he sleeps, his wudu is still maintained. Like it is mentioned, narrated by some of the companions, when it was the Isha time, the late night prayer in the masjid, they would wait for the salah and they slumber may take them. They may like fall asleep. And once the salah is called, they stand up without performing ablution. So this means that their type of sleep was not deep sleep, of course, and they were in a pose where they can ensure that no excrement of air can happen and take place. Also, if somebody becomes insane, or if somebody become intoxicated, he loses his conscious. Therefore, he loses also his ablution. If he wants to perform salah, in this case, he is required to make ablution. The third issue is eating camel meat. Eating camel meat, this is proven in the Sunnah, that the Prophet said this: whomever eats camel meat should make wudu for salah. And of course, many scholars went into opinion that the camel meat does not break the one's wudu ablution, but rather it is recommended that the one makes ablution. So it is an issue of dispute between the scholars, but someone may be on the safe side to guarantee that your ibadah, your act of worship is sound and acceptable. Let the one, if he eats camel meat, do ablution to be in the safe side. The fourth invalidator, holding the private part directly with your hand without a barrier. So if somebody holds his private part with his hand and not other part of his body, in this case, scholars said he loses his ablution. Of course, again, this is a disputable issue between scholars, but again, to be on the safe side, if this happens from you, then you make ablution. If you don't, you are still following a sound opinion said by many scholars, of course. But if you want to be on the safe side, it is recommended that you make ablution, and that you lose your ablution. You have to make ablution in order to pray. The fifth invalidator is committing an act of apostasy. Somebody leaves the fold of Islam, and then he regrets doing that, and he wants to come back to Islam. We say, yes, you come back to Islam, no problem. You're more than welcome, but you have lost your ablution. If you want to pray, you need to make ablution again in order to pray. So those are invalidators of one's ablution. If any of these invalidators take place, then you have invalidated your ablution. And in the case of making ablution, we need to realize you do not need to make ablution for every prayer. So as long as you did not commit any of above invalidators, you are still holding your wudu, and you can perform more than one prayer with the same ablution. So you can perform the same more than one prayer with the same ablution. So for instance, if somebody in dhuhr time, noon time, he made ablution to pray noon prayer, and he remained holding his ablution, he did not do any of the invalidators until Asr time. So he can pray Asr time with the same ablution. Maghrib time came and he's still holding his ablution, did not commit any of the invalidators. We say, yes, you can continue praying with the same ablution that you did in noon time. Isha time came and he's still holding his ablution, he can still continue using that ablution and pray the Isha prayer. So not required for every prayer that you do a new ablution, but it is recommended, of course. Remember earlier we have mentioned the reward of performing ablution and how much of merits you collect from performing such act of worship. The one, if he gets the chance to, better to win this reward, inshallah ta'ala. So inshallah ta'ala, we'll stop here. So today we have covered the conditions of performing ablution. These are acts we need to pay attention for prior to salah, prior to ablution, sorry. And we talked about the pillars of ablution. Those are acts which are part of the ablution itself. And we talked about the invalidators of ablution. Those are acts, if done, the one invalidates his ablution and he is required to make wudu or take a shower if he wants to perform a prayer. So we'll stop here inshallah ta'ala. Barakallahu fikum wa jazakumullahu khairah wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.